The echo of a flute drifted through the polished marble halls of St. Augustine Preparatory Academy, a school so elite it was whispered about more than it was spoken of openly. The music didn't belong there, not in a place where silence was a status symbol and discipline was measured in tuition fees that started at $50,000 a semester. Yet there it was, a hauntingly beautiful melody, rising and falling like a conversation between heaven and earth. And in the middle of the hallway, sitting cross-legged on the cold floor, was a black janitor named Elijah Carter. Uniform faded, mop bucket pushed aside, hands cradling a worn wooden flute. Across from him sat a boy no one could calm, not the teachers, not the therapists, not even his own mother. The boy, 7-year-old Adrian Williams, was autistic. For years, he had been known at St. Augustine not for his brilliance, but for his uncontrollable meltdowns. His screams would echo so violently that teachers would rush to close doors, students would cover their ears, and even the principal had once suggested he should be moved to a special facility. But today was different. Today, Adrian was silent. Not silent in fear. Not silent in exhaustion. Silent because the melody of Elijah's flute had captured him completely. His body swayed, his eyes, usually darting frantic, were fixed, wide and calm, on the man before him. What neither Elijah nor Adrian knew was that from the shadows of the hallway, Adrian's mother was watching everything. And Adrian's mother was no ordinary woman. She was Victoria Williams, a billionaire tech mogul, founder of the global software empire Neurotech Systems. To the world, she was untouchable, a woman of power, intellect, and relentless ambition. But at that moment, she wasn't the CEO. She wasn't the billionaire everyone feared. She was just a mother whose world had been breaking piece by piece because her son had never found peace. Her eyes welled with tears as she watched a janitor, a man the school barely acknowledged, succeed in something the best doctors, therapists, and specialists in the country had failed to do. But beneath the awe, there was something else. Suspicion. Why was a janitor carrying a flute in the first place? Why did he know how to calm her son so effortlessly? And most of all, who exactly was Elijah Carter? The story of what happened next would tear open secrets no one saw coming. Because Elijah wasn't just a janitor, and Victoria wasn't just a billionaire mother. And this flute, this seemingly small moment in the school hallway, was about to uncover a history of betrayal, hidden genius, and a choice that could change both their lives forever. For the next few days, the whisper spread through St. Augustine's immaculate halls. Teachers spoke in hushed tones about the miracle in the hallway. Some dismissed it as coincidence. Others claimed Adrian had finally snapped out of it. But the truth? Every afternoon, when the chaos of school settled and most staff prepared to leave, Elijah would quietly sit with Adrian in an empty classroom. And every time, he would lift the flute to his lips, and the boy, who once refused to even look people in the eye, would sit mesmerized. Victoria noticed. At first, she said nothing. She simply watched. From doorways, from the security feed. Even once, hidden behind a column in the hallway, she studied Elijah, the way he spoke softly, the way he never forced Adrian to do anything, the way his entire being seemed tuned to patience. But suspicion gnawed at her. She called the principal. "Who vetted this janitor?" she asked. The principal stammered. "Ma'am, Elijah Carter has been with us for 6 months. Background check was clean. He's harmless." Harmless. The word bothered her, because something about Elijah didn't feel like just a janitor. His posture was too straight, his words too deliberate, his flute too skilled. So she did what billionaires do when they have questions. She called her private investigator, and the file that came back about Elijah Carter wasn't what she expected. Elijah Carter had once been a world-renowned classical flutist. He had played in Europe's greatest orchestras, filled concert halls with standing ovations, recorded albums at top classical charts. Critics called him the Black Mozart of the flute. His face had graced magazine covers. His future had been limitless. And then he vanished. No one knew why. No scandal. No retirement announcement. He simply disappeared from the world stage and within a year was forgotten by the same elite who once praised him. Now, he was pushing a mop in her son's school. The inconsistencies were glaring. Why would a man of such brilliance end up as a janitor? What was he hiding? Victoria's suspicion hardened into something else, fear. What if Elijah wasn't here by accident? What if he had targeted Adrian? What if this was manipulation? The billionaire mother's instinct screamed that she had to protect her son. But there was one thing Victoria didn't know. The reason Elijah had disappeared from the music world wasn't scandal. It wasn't failure. It was something far darker. The day Victoria decided to confront Elijah, the storm finally broke. She marched into the classroom where Adrian sat, humming softly along with the flute. She tore the instrument from Elijah's hands, her voice cold as steel. "Who are you? And what do you want with my son?" The room went silent. Adrian whimpered, his fragile calm shattered. Elijah's eyes lifted to hers. And for the first time, she saw it. Not the submissive humility of Janitor, but the sharp, unflinching gaze of a man who had lived through fire. "I want nothing from your son," Elijah said quietly, "except to give him what no one else has, the chance to be heard." Victoria's voice trembled with fury. "Don't play games with me. I know who you are. Elijah Carter, the prodigy who vanished. Why are you really here?" Elijah's jaw tightened. For a moment, he looked like he would refuse. But then, with a sigh that carried years of buried pain, he said, "Because once I had a child like him." Victoria froze. Elijah's voice broke as he continued. "My daughter, she was autistic too, and I failed her. I thought music could save her, but the world was cruel and I was too weak to protect her. She died, and when she did, I put the flute away. I walked away from everything. I came here because I couldn't stand to be in a world that still expected me to play while she was gone." The flute trembled in Victoria's hand. For the first time, the billionaire mother saw Elijah not as a threat, but as a mirror, because she, too, had built an empire while silently drowning in the fear of losing her son. Before she could speak, Adrian tugged at her sleeve, and in the smallest, clearest voice she had ever heard from him, he whispered, "Mommy Flute." Her knees buckled. Adrian had never spoken that word before. The janitor had done what no one else in the world could. But as relief washed over her, a dark realization crept in. If Elijah's past was true, then there was more to his story than he was telling. Something deeper, something dangerous. And she was about to find out. Victoria couldn't sleep that night. Her son's voice, Mommy Flute, kept replaying in her head like a record she couldn't turn off. She had spent millions on therapists, hired specialists from 3 continents, built an entire therapy wing in her mansion, and not one of them had given Adrian what Elijah Carter had in a single hallway. But still, suspicion lingered. Elijah's story of his daughter's death, was it true, or was it a calculated performance? Victoria was a billionaire because she never took anything at face value. The next morning, she summoned her investigator again. "Find me everything," she ordered. Not the artist Elijah Carter, the father, the man. When the file landed on her desk, she nearly dropped it. It was all true. Elijah had a daughter, Naomi Carter, bright, sensitive, autistic. She had been bullied relentlessly at school. Doctors prescribed medications that dulled her spark. Elijah poured every ounce of himself into music, believing he could create a world beautiful enough for her to survive in. But one winter night, Naomi wandered away from a care facility. They found her body 2 days later, near a frozen lake. 7 years old. The press never found out. Elijah vanished before anyone could dig deeper, and Victoria understood why. The grief was enough to erase a man from the world. She closed the file with trembling hands. Suddenly, her suspicion felt like cruelty. For the first time, she wasn't looking at Elijah as a janitor, or a stranger, or even a flutist. She was looking at him as a father who had lost everything, and still chose to give what remained of his gift to her son. But she also knew something else. The school didn't deserve him. That week, Victoria attended a parent-teacher board meeting. It was the kind of gathering where mothers wore diamonds larger than engagement rings, where fathers spoke in stock prices and vacation homes. They looked at her with admiration and fear, as always. But today, she wasn't here to maintain status. She was here for Elijah. When the topic of problematic students arose, Adrian's name subtly implied, Victoria slammed her hand on the polished mahogany table. "My son is not a problem," she said, voice like thunder. "My son is brilliance waiting to be unlocked. And the only person in this entire institution who has treated him as such is your janitor." Gasps circled the table. Someone chuckled nervously. "With respect, Mrs. Williams, you can't mean—" "I do mean it," she snapped. "Elijah Carter is the only educator in this school who has reached my son. And if you people are too blind to see that, then perhaps you don't deserve to educate children at all." The room fell silent. Later, the principal cornered her. "Mrs. Williams, surely you don't want the school's reputation tied to someone like him?" Her glare could have cut stone. "You mean a black man with a mop? Or a genius you were too arrogant to recognize?" For the first time in her life, Victoria didn't just defend her son. She defended Elijah. The attention didn't go unnoticed. News traveled fast, as it always did in wealthy circles. Soon, reporters sniffed out the rumor. The missing prodigy flutist found working as janitor. Within days, Elijah's face was splashed across headlines. Old concert footage resurfaced online. Critics demanded to know why he vanished. Fans mourned his lost brilliance. Offers poured in, concert halls begging for a comeback tour. But Elijah refused every call. He didn't want the stage. He didn't want fame. He wanted only to keep playing for Adrian. Victoria found him one evening in the empty music room, polishing his flute. "You don't have a hide anymore," she said softly. "The world wants you back." His answer was quiet but firm. "The world never wanted me. They wanted my gift. And when Naomi died, the gift wasn't enough. I'm not going back to that stage, Mrs. Williams." Her throat tightened. She saw in the reflection of her own struggle, how the world valued her empire, but not the sleepless nights she spent holding her son during meltdowns. "Elijah," she whispered, "what if this isn't about going back? What if it's about going forward? Not for them. For him. For Adrian. Maybe for children like Naomi, too." For the first time, he didn't look broken. He looked thoughtful. Months later, the school auditorium was packed. Not for a wealthy donor. Not for an academic award. But for something entirely new. The music for every child project. At the center was Adrian, standing nervously on stage, holding a small recorder. And next to him, Elijah, flute in hand. The two began to play. At first shaky, then strong. The melody that once calmed Adrian in the hallway now filled the entire auditorium. Parents wept. Teachers who once doubted him sat speechless. And in the front row, Victoria's hands trembled as tears rolled freely down her face. Her son was no longer the boy everyone dismissed as problematic. He was a musician, a communicator, a child who had finally found a voice. And Elijah, he wasn't just a janitor anymore. He wasn't just a flutist. He was something far greater. Proof that grief can be transformed into purpose, that even in loss, we can create light for others. When the final note faded, the room erupted in applause. Adrian beamed, Elijah bowed, and Victoria rose to her feet, whispering a prayer of gratitude she had never thought she'd speak. The story of Elijah and Adrian spread beyond the school. Soon, the Music for Every Child project expanded into a national program, giving children with autism access to music therapy at no cost. Elijah dedicated every note to Naomi. Victoria funded the initiative with every resource at her disposal. And Adrian, he became its living proof. The lesson was clear. Sometimes the most extraordinary gifts come from those society overlooks. Sometimes healing doesn't come from money, power, or prestige, but from patience, compassion, and the courage to listen. And sometimes two broken souls, one grieving a lost child, another desperate to save hers, can find redemption in the same song. Because in the end, Elijah Carter wasn't just a janitor who played the flute. He was a man who taught a billionaire mother that the greatest wealth is the power to heal a child's heart. And Adrian, he was no longer silent. He had a voice, and the world was finally listening. Subscribe for more interesting and powerful stories.